Hello? Pull up a chair. My name is Earl McKenna, and the sea, well, the river, in this case, has given me more stories than fish. Before we get into today's tale, if you enjoy good prose with the smell of salt, or in this case, brackish water, I'd appreciate the support. Click that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any adventure. Now, where was I? Ah, yes, it was a Tuesday, I think. Tuesdays are usually quiet, holding their breath between the memory of the weekend and the promise of Friday. I'd taken the Sea-Worn, my old reliable skiff, her paint chipped like a bad memory, not out to the deep water, but inland into the labyrinth of bayous that web the coast of Louisiana. People think I'm a saltwater man through and through, but the truth is, the rivers talk, too. They just whisper different secrets. The air was thick that day, sticky, like warm molasses. The sun was a dull copper coin in a sky the color of dirty gauze. It was the kind of day that presses down on you, makes you feel every year in your bones. I wasn't after anything big, just a quiet day, the pull of the line, the soft plop of the lure, maybe a few decent bass for pan, or a small redfish that had wandered too far upstream. I'd anchored in a wide, slow-moving part of the river where the water was the color of strong, milky tea, and the cypress trees dripped their Spanish moss like old men's beards. I remember feeling something off. Not bad, not dangerous, just misaligned. You fish as long as I have, you learn to read the water, not just with your eyes, but with your skin, with the hair on your arm. The water was too still. The birds were too quiet. Even the dragonflies, usually zipping around like tiny, iridescent helicopters, were nowhere to be seen. It was like the whole swamp was holding its breath, waiting. I cast my line, the jitterbug lure making its little gurgle pop on the surface. For an hour, nothing. Not a nibble, just the oppressive, wet silence. I was about to reel in, move spot, maybe call it a day, when the line gave a sharp thwack. Not a big pull, just a mean, peevish little tug. I reeled it in. It was a small bass, no bigger than my hand, but it was the sorriest-looking fish I'd ever seen. Its scales were dull, and it had a strange, milky look to one of its eyes. It looked exhausted, defeated. I felt a pang of pity for the thing. I reached for my pliers to get the hook out, and that's when I saw it. Pinned to its dorsal fin wasn't a standard plastic tag from the Fish and Wildlife Department. This was a piece of metal, dark and tarnished, almost black. It was small, maybe the size of my thumbnail, and shaped like a rough circle. It looked old, ancient. There were markings on it, but they were worn smooth by the water and time. Impossible to read. It felt heavy in a way that its size didn't justify. I've seen a lot of strange things pulled from the water. Old bottles with no message, a single high-heeled shoe, once even a perfectly preserved porcelain doll that stared at me with blank, judging eyes until I threw it back. But this tag felt different. It felt important. It hummed with a low, cold energy against my fingers. My first thought was science. Maybe some local university was doing a study with old-world tags, but it looked nothing like science. It looked like a warning or a claim. I held the small bass in my hand, its little gill plates working weakly. It looked up at me with its one good eye, and I swear to you it wasn't fear I saw. It was just a profound, bottomless weariness. I thought about the legends the old Creole fishermen used to tell, stories traded over warm beer and stale crackers in dockside bars. They talked about the river guardians, the old spirits that claimed certain fish as their own. They called the biggest one Vieux Tom, Old Tom. A catfish, they said, bigger than a pirogue, with eyes like muddy moons and a hide as tough as boiled leather. They said he was the king of the river bottom, and that everything that swam by his. Just stories, of course, the kind of tales you tell to scare greenhorns or pass the time. But holding that fish, With its ancient cold tag, the stories didn't feel so far-fetched. The air felt colder. The silence of the bayou deepened, becoming less a waiting and more of a watching. "Well, little fella," I whispered, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness, "today ain't your day to meet the frying pan, and I reckon you belong to someone." With my pliers, I worked the hook free as gently as I could. The fish gave a weak flip, but I didn't release it, not yet. I looked at the tag again. Part of me, the part that likes shiny things and answers, wanted to keep it, pry it off the fin, but it felt wrong, like stealing mail, like taking a nameplate off a man's door. "You keep your marker," I said to the fish, "and you tell your boss, Earl McKenna, meant no harm." I slipped the base back into the tea-colored water. It lay still for a second, as if forgetting how to swim. Then, with a flick of its tail, it was gone. Not a fast, panicked dash, but a slow, deliberate fade into the brown depths. I wiped my hands on my jeans, the cold, metallic feel of the tag still on my fingertips. I picked up my rod, ready to cast again, but I stopped. The water in front of my boat, where the bass had vanished, was moving. It wasn't a ripple. It wasn't a wake. It was a bulge, slow, rising swell, as if something immense was breathing just beneath the surface. The water didn't break. It just humped upwards, smooth and oily, before sinking back down. I'm not a man who scares easy. I've seen rogue waves in the Gulf that could swallow a freighter. I've had sharks aplenty circle my boat, their eyes as dead as tax collectors, but this made the whiskey I'd had last night turn sour in my stomach. The air pressure changed. I felt it in my sinuses. A deep, resonant thrum, more felt than heard, seemed to come up from the hull of the Sea-Worn, and then about 20 yards off my port bow, in the deepest part of the channel, the bubbles started. Not the little fizz of a submerged log releasing gas. These were big, slow bubbles, the size of my fist, then the size of cabbages. They came up thick and fast, churning the brown water into a white foam, like the river was suddenly boiling. It smelled of deep mud, of old rot, and something metallic, like rust. I grabbed the oar and pushed off a piling just to put some distance. "Easy now," I said to no one. "Easy." The Sea-Worn drifted back, but my eyes were locked on that patch of roiling. It was the kind of thing you see. You know you should start the motor. You know you should leave, but you don't. You can't. It's not just fear. It's curiosity. The kind of terrible, morbid curiosity that keeps you watching when you should be running. The bubbling stopped, just like that. It ceased, and the silence that fell in its place was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. It was absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the lapping of water against the hull. The river had become a sheet of dark, polished glass. I could see my own reflection, the old, weathered fence hat, the wide, staring eye, and then, in the reflection, right behind me, something else. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just watched the water. The shadow started to rise. It wasn't a fish. It was a landmass, a dark, mottled shape that grew and grew, blocking out the reflected light of the sky. It was wider than my boat was long. I've caught Wells catfish in Spain on a bet, monsters that weighed over 200 pounds. I've seen the giant Mekong catfish in blurry photographs. This would have eaten them for a snack. The water broke, but it wasn't a violent break. It was a surface, a slow, deliberate rising like a submarine coming up for air. The first thing I saw was the head. It was as wide as my pickup truck. The skin wasn't scaled. It was thick, leathery, and scarred, the color of old tires and river mud. And the eye. It rolled in its socket, a dull, opaque orb the size of a dinner plate. It wasn't the black, soulless eye of a shark. It was intelligent. It was ancient. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking into me. It saw the 50-odd years I've spent on the water. It saw the lies I've told, the fish I've lost, the whiskey drunk. It saw everything. From the corners of its vast, gaping mouth, The barbels hung down. They weren't whiskers. They were thick, muscular tentacles as long as my arm, a thick hawser rope. They twitched and tasted the water around my... This was him. This was Vieux Tom, Old Tom, the legend, the River King. And he wasn't a story. He was real. He was right here. My heart wasn't pounding. It had stopped. I think I'd forgotten to breathe. My hand was frozen on the tiller, my knuckle white. He let out a breath, a great whoosh of air that smelled like the bottom of the world, like 1,000 years of mud and dead things and secrets. The mist from it hit my face, and it was cold. He drifted closer. The sea-worn was toy. He could have flipped me, swallowed me whole, and been back to his nap before the bubbles cleared. But he wasn't aggressive. He was curious, or maybe he was judging. He nudged the boat, just a gentle thump. The sea-worn rocked violently, and a half-full thermos of coffee slid off the seat and clattered to the deck. I didn't move. I didn't dare. "Afternoon," I croaked. My voice was stranger, thin and dry. Mighty fine day for a swim." The great catfish just stared. Its eye rolled again, taking in the boat, the rod, and finally, me. I had the strangest feeling he was looking for something. He was checking. Had I kept the little base? Was the tag in my pocket? He submerged just slightly, and a long, thick barbel, gray and scarred, rose from the water. It was like a snake. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace. It came over the gunwale. I could have touched it. It tasted the air, then it touched the deck of my boat. It slithered, wet and rough, over the spot where my coffee thermos had spilled. It retracted. He knew I'd let the fish go. The giant creature sank a little lower until only the vast flat top of its head and that one ancient eye were above the water. He was satisfied, or maybe he was grateful. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It came out a shaky whistle. "Well, I'll be on my way then, sir." The catfish blinked. A slow, ponderous lowering of a thick, nictitating membrane. It was the most human and the most alien gesture I'd ever seen. And then he threw something at me. That's the only way I can describe it. He opened that cavern of a mouth, a dark void that could have swallowed an anchor, and with a short, powerful huff, he spat. Something flew through the air, glinting a dull yellow in the strange copper light. It hit the wooden seat beside me with a loud, heavy clink. Then, as slowly and silently as he had arrived, Vieux Tom sank. The water swirled, creating a massive, slow-moving eddy where he'd been. The sea-worn spun gently in his wake, and then he was gone. The silence rushed back in, but it was different now. It was a normal silence. The insects started to buzz again. A kingfisher rattled in the distance. The river went back to being just a river. Or maybe not. I sat there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from awe, from the sheer impossibility of it. I looked down at the seat next to me. It wasn't a rock, it wasn't a piece of old tackle, coin, but it was like no coin I'd ever seen. It was heavy, for one, heavier than a silver dollar. It was thick and unevenly shaped, as if it had been hammered flat by hand, and it was gold, not shiny, brassy, new gold. This was old, deep, soft gold with a reddish tint to it. It was covered in a thin film of river slime, but underneath it glowed. I picked it up. It was warm, or maybe my hand was just cold. On one side, there was a cross, a simple, ornate, old-world cross. On the other, a shield, a coat of arms. The details were worn smooth. I knew enough history to know what I was looking at. This was old, maybe from one of the galleons that sank off the coast centuries ago, its treasure scattered, some of it washed up river by a long-forgotten hurricane. A Spanish doubloon. Where had a fish gotten a Spanish doubloon? Had it been sitting in his great muddy gullet for 100 years? Had he found it in a sunken channel? Was it payment? I thought about the little bass, strange ancient tag, a protected fish, a marked one. I had shown mercy. I had respected the claim, and View Tom, the king of the river, the guardian of the deep, had paid me for my trouble. Or maybe it was a trade, a life coin. The Lorota of it all hit me. A giant catfish, a magic tag, a gold coin. Who would ever believe me? I'd tell this story at the bar, and the boys would laugh, clap me on the back, and buy me a beer for spinning a good one. "That's a whale of a tale, Earl," they'd say. "You really outdone yourself this time." And I would nod, and I'd drink the beer. I'd know I'd never fish that part of the bayou again. I felt it wouldn't be right. It was his water, his territory. We'd had our transaction, and you don't overstay your welcome in a king's. I started the engine. The old Evan Rood coughed to life, shattering the peace, and it sounded good. It sounded normal. I pointed the sea-worn toward home, the copper sun finally dipping below the cypress trees, painting the water in shades of purple and blood. I still have the coin. I keep it in my old tackle box, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth. I don't look at it often, but sometime, on nights when the wind is high and the water is restless, I take it out. I hold it in my hand. It still feels warm. It reminds me the world is a lot bigger and a lot stranger than we think. It reminds me that we're just guests here, floating on the surface of a world that has depths we can't even imagine. Sometimes, if you're respectful and a little bit lucky, those depths will throw you a little something back. Hey, while you're mulling that over, I've got a question. Where are you all watching from? I love to hear how far these stories travel. Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't yet, this would be a great time to subscribe to the channel. We'd be glad to have you. Now I've told that story maybe 3 times in my life, and each time I wonder, was it a hallucination? Was it the heat, the humidity, a little too much whiskey in my coffee that morning? Was it just an old, half-rotten log that surfaced? And did I find the coin maybe snagged in my net earlier and only just noticed I dreamed the whole thing? The man of science, the man who trusts his charts and his sonar, say yes. He'd say there's a logical explanation for all of it, that catfish can't get that big, that they don't think, that they don't pay debts. But then I look at the coin. I look at the worn golden gleam of it. I feel the impossible weight of it in my palm. I know what I saw. I saw a king. I saw a guardian. And I saw a truth as old as the mud. You respect the water, and just maybe the water will respect you back. I put the sea-worn in her slip, tied her off, and walked up the dock. My legs felt a little wobbly, like I'd just stepped off a long-haul trip in high seas. Not a quiet day in the bayou. I didn't tell the wife. I didn't tell the boys at the dock. I just sat on my porch with a glass of the good stuff and watched the night come on. I thought about that little bass, swimming free with its strange, dark jewelry. I thought about that ancient, knowing eye. And I thought about the gold coin, heavy in my pocket, pressing against my leg. A Lorota? A tall tale? Maybe, but it's my tale. And the water keeps its secret. And once in a while, it shares one just to remind us who's really in. The main lesson from this old fisherman's tale is that the world, especially the sea and the old rivers, operates on rules much older and deeper than our own. It's about respect. It teaches that showing respect and mercy, even to the smallest, sorriest creature, is a powerful act. Sometimes the ancient powers that watch over the world take notice, and while you might not understand their currency, respect is always repaid. Thanks for spending some time with this old man on the water. If this story made you think, or just gave you a welcome chill, I'd be mighty grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know you're out, and it means I'll have a reason to keep telling these tales.